Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have another very special episode of Mormon. Every episode is very special, isn't it, Landon? I say that every time.
They are to me.
They are to me, too. I don't know if they're special to our audience, but they're special to us. Anyway, we have a topic that we've sort of discussed before. What is our topic today, Landon? Let's put up the slide.
The same topic that Russell Nelson likes to talk about.
That's exactly it. We are talking about temples.
This just keeps growing, doesn't it?
It does keep growing. That's why I have this collage here of so many temples. So yeah, we have quite a number of updates today. So we better just dive right in. Let's go to our next slide. As you said, this is President Nelson's favorite topic. And so I thought this meme was very appropriate that we made. I don't know if you remember Oprah a couple years ago, but she's saying, you get a temple, and you get a temple, and you get a temple. You all get a temple, because that is what we are seeing, right? Every conference, there are at least a dozen, if not more, temples announced.
Yeah, I think President Nelson is channeling his inner Oprah because that seems to be his favorite thing to do is wait for conference, show that he's still alive, and then announce a bunch of temples.
Oh, yes. Although I feel like the real meme, the real incident here on Oprah was she was giving away cars. So it was you get a car and you get a car, and you see the faces of the people in the audience and just so excited. I kind of feel like now at this point, I feel like it used to be that way when President Nelson or other prophets would announce a temple. There was just sheer joy. I feel like anymore there's a little
more temples.
Yeah.
And then we get to clean those.
If you're in leadership, your mind goes, oh my God, how am I going to staff that? We already have a temple 2 blocks over. There are real operational issues that come into play when you announce all these temples. So it is very interesting. But the Feel Good Moment at conference, it was always, remember when they announced, was it China or something? Yeah, just randomly announced it. Never really spoke to anyone in the Chinese government. And that temple is still on hold, but you can say it's going to go anywhere, I guess.
You absolutely can.
But we're going to be talking. Go ahead.
They feel like it can be anywhere, and they continue to push and show that they can put it anywhere they want.
And that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about not the imaginary temples that have not been built yet or come to fruition, but the ones that are announced and locations have been chosen, and there are things happening in those towns. So let's go to our next slide. Okay. So as you know, we cover the Cody Temple. We cover the Heber Temple. We recently did an episode on the Lone Mountain, Nevada Temple. And earlier this week, I feel it was like a bat signal in the sky, only it was a temple, right?
I'm feeling that way at this point. It's like, oh, here we go again.
Here we go again. We sort of got the call out from a temple that's being built in Texas, the McKinney Temple. And we were contacted by a resident there who just is kind of like, oh, we're trying to figure out what's going on. It's funny seeing this over and over. We should make the stages of temple building, right? Because the first one is kind of confusion. The second one is it starts to dawn. The third one is what? There's these stages that these residents that we work with kind of go through as they realize what's happening in their town. So if we go to the next slide, I have a kind of paraphrase of this email that we got for the McKinney Texas LDS Temple. And there's a picture of it. So our new friend in McKinney emailed and said, the residents in a small suburb of Dallas, Texas called Fairview. Now, what do you want to say about the fact that it's Fairview, Landon? This is a kind of interesting scenario.
Yeah, it's Fairview, Texas, but it was originally announced as the Prosper, Texas Temple.
Yes.
Then they moved it to McKinney Texas Temple, which is really in Fairview, Texas, which once they build it will no longer be a Fairview. It'll be an obstructed view, Texas. So somehow
I have to go there.
This is the one place where the temple got moved, but then they just moved it to we don't know why it got moved from Prosper, but they moved it, and they moved it right into another residential neighborhood, just like they are doing everywhere else. And this is where we get the problem again.
Yeah, no, this is true. And it is interesting because the name was actually the Prosper Temple. Like that name was announced. And then suddenly there's a little announcement, "Oh, not so much. We're now going to call it the McKinney Temple. And we're going to build it in Fairview," which, in talking to our resident friends there, it's a small town within, bordered around by larger towns. And so the church will be dealing with this smaller town city council. And I don't know if that's by design, and also a smaller town planning and zoning board. I don't know if that's by design. But, now that I'm saying it out loud, I wonder if just saying Prosper Temple, maybe it would make people think of Ensign Peak or $250 billion. Maybe it just wasn't optically a good look. I don't know. But for whatever reason, the McKinney Temple is being built in Fairview, Texas. And as our friend says, population 10,000, small for this area. And they are dealing with the same potential thing as Cody, Heber, and Lone Mountain here in Fairview. The LDS Church is trying to build the largest LDS temple in the state of Texas, 45,000 square feet, 6.5 stories with a 173-foot steeple in a, what, Landon?
Residential neighborhood.
Residential neighborhood. Yes, we have heard this over and over. And again, we ask ourselves, there are so many areas where a temple could be built where it's already zoned for. Laws of the land. I keep saying that over and over.
And this just goes to fairness, because as we talked to this resident, he told us, I did my due diligence when I bought this property. I went and I looked at what the zoning was of the property around me, and it was zoned residential. And you'll see that there was actually two churches right next to where the temple's going. One of them is an LDS stake center. So he knew the churches were there. He knew that churches could go in a residential area. The church is slightly taller than allowed, but the roof line falls within. It's just the steeple part, which is what we normally see in residentials. The other church, which and we'll show that, is builds to the height that they're allowed to build to. They stay within the code. So he had no idea that they could even build something of this size in his backyard. And that's where it goes to fairness. It's zoned so that when you buy a property, you know what you're getting into. Yeah. And then to just change the zoning because the church wants to move in there. In fact, they're not changing the zoning. They'll just do a special use permit and allow it in there. And we'll talk about why a little bit later.
Yeah, and we see this in Lone Mountain too, Heber, actually everywhere, especially Lone Mountain, as we get to understand their situation where they have a protected neighborhood, they have a rural neighborhood association, and again, moved in, checked all the codes, made sure it was where they wanted to be. And so to the people that say a property owner has the right to build what they want to build, that's not exactly how it works, because you do want the protection of the codes and ordinances so that you're protected in what to expect. So I don't know, it's a fine line, but it's very interesting. So he continues, the first planning and zoning meeting was delayed until May 9th, 2024, because we were able to provide enough opposition to push it back. But we are afraid that it's just a formality. Most residents are unaware of the magnitude or scale of the proposed temple. And then he put the bat signal up, right? And there it is. But again, we see the same thing. You know how it works. There's a temple announced in conference, and you don't hear anything for a year or so. Then suddenly in a neighborhood, this resident said he received some kind of notification because he lives within 500 feet.
And it's only 500 feet, which is nothing. You're only talking about a couple hundred homes max who even get any notice of what's happening when they do this. So
yeah, that's exactly it. So that tipped him off and some of his other residents right there. And they're like, well, we better go to this meeting. What is happening? And of course, everybody thought it's a church building. People that aren't in Utah or aren't Mormons don't really understand what a temple is or how gargantuan it is. So once they started to see the scope of it, then they started to go, oh my gosh, they're going to have to change all the codes and the zones. And that's when they started to kind of organize a little bit just to try to understand what is happening. But again, as he says here, most residents are unaware of the magnitude or scale of this temple because there's a religion is building a building. It's difficult for residents who understand or begin to understand what's happening to help other residents be aware. So this was, a reach out to us. Through different channels. They knew that we talked to other people about temples just to see if there was any kind of help. And again, I have to say this every time. No one is opposed to a temple being built. Please build them where they're zoned for where it's appropriate, and, follow the laws of the land. We learned from talking to this resident that his property, or the property right where the temple's going to go, is on a hill. And that, of course, fits right into Cody, everywhere else, right? You want it to be seen. So,
and this kind of plays into the 500 foot, because I'm sure the reason that they say that you only have to notify anyone within 500 feet is because if you have a 35-foot roof, for the most part, when you're 500 feet away, you won't see that building anymore. So they're kind of letting the people who are going to be affected by it know it. But when you're building at 175 feet, you should be letting everyone know for about 2 miles, because you're going to see it for 2 to 3 miles easily. And the ones here I can see from my bedroom, I can see Bountiful 30 miles away. So
isn't that ironic? From my house, I can see one temple clearly. It's right there. You can see about 2 from your house.
Yeah.
Why is that? We're podcasting in the shadow of the temple. Let's say
Always.
that. I don't know. So I think the neighbor has then, if I remember what our next slide is, started to put together some information. Yeah. Okay. So what they learned, and this is the announcement of the temple. Do you want to kind of read through that, just the relevant parts, just really quick to go through?
Yeah, the temple was announced on 2nd of October. It's on 8.16 acres. It does have
2 years ago. Let's make sure it was, we let them know it was
announced 2
announced
years ago.
2022. Yeah.
It's 44,000 square feet, so about half the size maybe of Heber, but it does have a 173-foot steeple on it to the top of the spire. They say the steeple's 107 feet tall. Then they have a spire that takes it up even further. So this was, it was announced as the Prosper Temple, became the McKinney Temple, so it's basically located in Fairview, but the neighbors just really found out about this just recently of where it was really going at.
Right, and saw the rendering. It says on February 26th of this year. So of course there's that gap, announced in October of 2022. Finally, the renderings and where it's going to go, everything comes out finally almost 2 years later. And that's when the residents go, wait, what?
Well, the church makes sure of this. They do not release the renderings until they apply for the permit. So that the clock starts and people have as little time as possible to have any input or to organize or to say, we don't want this. Meanwhile, they know where it's going in, and they have all the time in the world to prepare and to get their members mobilized. And we're going to see that that's exactly what they've already been doing.
Yeah, and we really saw that in Lone Mountain, where it happened very quickly, and luckily those residents were able to kind of mobilize equally as quickly. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So I think our next slide is some information that the McKinney, I'm calling them the McKinney residents, but they technically are Fairview, because it's all kind of there in that same area. So they put together some information. Do you want to go through this, Landon? I thought this was good that they quickly came up with some slides to share with other people in the area, just to kind of explain what this building was going to be.
Yeah, so you can see it's going again in a residential area with a 35-foot max roof height. That seems to be all around the country, pretty much the limits for residential areas. And yet the church just continues to build far and above the maximum height that they can go. And so it's going to be called the McKinney Temple with a 173-foot tall steeple. But we came up with a little rhyme, I guess you could say.
Landon came up with the rhyme, because we spent so much time in primary, right? So some of you guys may recognize this. Others may go, what are they doing? This is a weirdly Mormon thing, I think. Or I think maybe other religions do it.
I think others know it.
It's like a little hand. It's like, here is the temple.
Here's the temple. Here is the steeple. Build it where it doesn't belong. And piss off all the people.
We may have jumped the shark with that one, but I thought it was really cute. Yeah,
that should be the new primary thing, because that seems to be what they do in every community that they go into.
Yeah, and that's the symbol for all the people being pissed off.
Yes. We could use just the middle finger, but that doesn't show how many people you've really pissed off.
No, doesn't at all. So that's very funny. All right. Oh, and I thought this was really good that they came up, because you described before. Why don't you tell them about the 2 other religious buildings in the area?
So what you can see, and I know it's a little small, let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger, but what you have here is you've got the property where the temple is going to be built. And off to the side, you have two churches. One is the Chase Oaks Church Sloan Creek campus. The other one is the LDS Stake Center that is being built next to. And you can look and you can see that there's a 35-foot max roof height. And if you draw a 35-foot line, the Chase Oaks Church fully complies with the law. And the LDS Church complies with the law in that they have an unsupported steeple, which doesn't count towards the roof height, which is the argument that we had in Cody, was that 110-foot steeple didn't count, even though it had structural steel put into it.
Yeah.
This is the proposed temple. You can see, so imagine this. This is an LDS church. We know how big those are. Think about what a house looks like compared to this, and you can see the houses that back up to it and that surround it. You're going to have a 173-foot temple in there. Again, you could stack multiple of churches on top of each other to get to that height. It's amazing to me that the other churches all are able to conduct their worship services in the height required height, but the LDS church cannot. And we're not just talking about steeples here. You know, the rule is the roof line. And that's why the Stake Center can get by, because the roof line is under 35 feet. The roof line in this case isn't even close. It's 63 feet to the roof line. So it's double the height of what it's allowed to be in there. And this is why everyone's getting so mad.
Yeah.
It is not because you're building a church. It's not because they hate you. It's because you're building these massive buildings that don't belong in these areas where they're not zoned for. And you're taking advantage of certain laws to try to push through something that doesn't belong there. And that's why people are upset.
Yep. That's the only reason people are upset. And the other thing, of course, this graphic doesn't show, there was another slide about that, is that this will be lit. Even when the church says it's making concessions and lowering the lighting, it's still the brightest thing you'll ever see in the area. And I'll say again, it's not just dark skies. As we talked to the residents of McKinney and Fairview, they have dark skies ordinances. And they kind of sounded like, but we have dark sky ordinances. And I said, let me connect you with Heber. And we'll see how that goes. Because no, those were overridden instantly in Heber. That doesn't matter. And that kind of lighting can affect wildlife. It can especially affect birds. You know, it's just doesn't belong there. So not only gargantuan, but also lit up, you know, I think 20 hours a day, pretty much. There is a small period of time where they don't, and I don't think that people can get a sense of what this really is until it's built, and then it's too late. So it's very interesting, but I commend these residents for gathering information and rallying some of the neighbors just to attend some of the meetings, do your due diligence, and find out what's happening in your area. Well, at the same time that the residents of Fairview, McKinney area were rallying the troops, we also have LDS congregations being rallied. And this picture is so funny to me.
What the hell's wrong with their faces?
You know how I love AI. So I just typed in Mormon leader talking to congregation. And, you know, I think the Mormon leader looks good, but the other people on there, like their faces are melting off.
Melty.
I know when I've sitting in long meetings, I feel like sometimes
I felt that
my
way
makeup melts off. But yeah, like some of them, their brains are hanging out. I don't know. AI, it's a double-edged sword, as Elder Gong and Elder Bednar have told us. So, but anyway, rallying the troops. So about less than a week ago, we got word and were emailed a letter that was being passed out, you know, through email to the congregations in the area, to the LDS congregations. And this letter, we've seen other letters before where they're writing to the wards, telling them to support or to show up at meetings. But this letter was very different, and we're going to take you through it, and you're going to see what we're talking about. So I'll read the first one, and then you can read the next one. We'll just go through. But again, we've redacted names because this does have names and email addresses in it, because it was given to the ward members so that they could, you know, express themselves politically. So when we received this letter, it said, "This is Sherman, Texas Stake. The following message is being sent to members of the Sherman Stake at the request of Elder Cannon, our Area 70. Okay, so some higher up in the church asked that this letter be sent out. And you know, this is this is something I was trying to explain to the McKinney residents that we talked to, that with a push of a button, using member tools, right, electronically, hundreds, I mean, probably thousands, right, of people can receive any kind of information that they want to get out. Would you say it's thousands? I think so.
Oh, I'm guessing so in a stake. And
Yeah, in a state.
And again, the important thing to remember here is this is not local leaders. This is coming from Area 70. So this is someone high up in the church.
Yeah, and I don't know how widely this letter was passed out, but I do know I received it from multiple sources, some in Dallas. I mean, so it definitely went around. Anyway, it says, brothers and sisters, we've been asked to help support the approval of the plan to build the McKinney Texas Temple in Fairview, Texas, by writing emails of support. We need the voting body, and that's, the city council or the planning and zoning board, to hear many voices of support with personal reasons why you want this temple here in our community. It doesn't have to be long. Brief is actually better. Be sincere and share from the heart. We don't want these to seem scripted. And yet, as you'll see when we go to the next slide, it's totally scripted. So here we go. Landon, what else does it say?
Here's what they say to do. Please email planning manager.
And there was a name in an email there.
Yep.
I've redacted that.
Subject line, resident in support. I guess nobody is not in support of this. So resident in support for those who live in Fairview, or neighbor in support for those who live in a nearby town who are in the Temple district. So doesn't matter if you live in Fairview or not, they want you to try to impact the vote from Fairview.
Can I just say that somebody in Arkansas told me they got this letter to write an email in support of the Texas Temple.
So it's widespread.
So I don't know if that was just a fluke, but.
So now we're gonna go into the non-scripted part. In your email, you could answer a couple of the following questions: why you're excited for and support a temple in Fairview, and what it will mean to you personally and allow you to worship God, practice your faith.
That's important.
That's important. You see, the bold was added by us.
Yes, we added the bold.
How houses of worship in a community.
Well, let's go back and discuss that. Allow you to worship. That's important.
Yeah. Well, I'll hit that when we get to the bottom here.
Oh, okay.
How houses of worship in a community benefit the whole community. How the temple helps those who attend to be better people and improve their lives, and therefore improve the community. How it will bless your family. Notice that they keep saying this is a benefit to the community.
Well, we hear that all the time. And I believe the residents believe, I mean, the LDS members, they're all like, it's going to be okay. As soon as you build it, as soon as we get it built, you'll see. But by including those words, allow you to worship, they're talking about your religious freedom, right? Because they're saying, you need to let us worship how we want. So that's a key phrase. And there's going to be another key phrase as we go on. So absolutely.
Yep. While we want you to express your feelings in your own words, after we just told you what to say, some key concepts would be helpful to the approval process. A key message needs to be on the importance of the temple and how it allows you to worship as you choose, which goes to the above statement, to practice your faith, and that the building itself is a symbol of your faith, including the steeple. Now, we bolded that section, but this becomes very important, and we'll get into that in just a second.
Yeah, and that's why I have a whole slide that says, including the steeple. We have never seen those words before, that the steeple is an integral part of LDS worship, and there is a reason for this. So this is all in bold. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Steeples point toward heaven and serve a purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. Now, again, remember, this message is coming from church authorities to the residents so that they can express these thoughts about how the height of the steeple is one of the most important parts of attending the temple. Then in all capitals in the letter, it says, you don't need to use these exact words. In fact, it's probably best if we don't. Use your own. After they told you exactly the sentiments to express. At this time, the project will come for a vote by the Planning and Zoning Commission on Thursday, May 9th. So that's coming right up. We also would like to invite you to consider including the Temple and Fairview town leaders and residents in your fast this Sunday and on May 5th. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for your willingness to help prepare our community for another house of the Lord. I don't know if you've noticed this, but temples are no longer called temples. They're called houses of the Lord. Tremendous blessings will come to us and our neighbors and friends through our temple worship. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact, and there's a phone number of a temple liaison in the stake, and there's an email. Communication Director, Dallas East Coordinating Council of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So this letter floored us. It has floored a lot of people who have seen it. It's almost like they said it out loud, but that steeple part is brand new and it's very important. And we're going to go into that.
Yeah, the reason this is so important is because they're outright lying at this point. The reason that they're lying is they're saying the height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. Now, I've been on a mission. I've taught many different courses in the church. I was a seminary teacher. Never did we teach that you had to have a steeple on a temple in order for it to be considered a temple, or that a height of a steeple is a religious observance. So why are they saying this? And we know the reason that they're saying this is exactly what happened in Cody.
Yep.
Because the reason that they're allowed to put these temples in these neighborhoods is because Congress passed a bill called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000. And the purpose of that was to help religious institution and state regulation of their property, avoid state regulation of their property through zoning restrictions. The intent of this law was that you couldn't pass regulations that might stop you from building a Muslim church or a Jewish synagogue, or targeting specific religions that you don't want in.
Protection.
So you put some law in there so that they can't do that. So what the law says, though, is you have to adhere to the codes unless you can prove that it's part of your religious observance that you need a special exemption from the zoning code.
Right.
That's what Cody pulled out when they tried to use this. And Cody told them, there is no reason that you need this religious exemption, because we have a whole list of temples that do not have steeples on them.
Right. You can go into that. Yeah.
Yes, you can build temples that are under 35 feet tall, that adhere to the zoning law and still have the observance that you want. And so this is why they're telling people, oh, this is part of our religious observance. This is part of our faith. We must have really tall buildings. Otherwise, it's not really a temple, and we can't worship the way that we desire, and you're breaking our First Amendment right. This is not a doctrine. This is a legal runaround. They are telling the members, and every member out there knows that there is no requirement to have a steeple to worship God in the Mormon faith.
Yeah, I even asked on Reddit. I said, hey, has anybody heard this? And everyone wrote, we don't know what you're talking about. We've never heard this. But it's true. In Cody, they tried that. And the residents said, oh, no, prove in your religion where there's a part that it says that you have to have that steeple. And they really couldn't show that. But I feel like now they're encouraging these residents to say this is part of our faith, not scripted, but using those words. And I predict, I'm going on the record right now, Landon, that within the next couple months, period of time, we are going to start hearing this idea slipped into talks, into addresses from church leaders, because then they can use that, what's it called again? The relupa?
Yeah.
You can use that and you can say, well, look, it was said right here by one of our apostles. So of course I made a meme. What does it say, Landon? Sometime in the very near future, and I have Elder Bednar.
Yes, because he speaks for the church
He
mainly.
does, yeah.
Let me be clear. The steeple height of an LDS temple has always been a major tenet of our religion. We can't worship how God commands us without a big-ass steeple. It's a core doctrine. If the big-ass steeple isn't allowed, that's religious persecution.
I go on the record right now that this will start creeping into any discussion of temple worship. And it makes me wonder, does that mean everyone that was sealed in a shorter temple, it's not valid? I think we'll talk about that later. But we did, and I think Cody came up with this list. I think some of the other areas came up with a list of beautiful temples that are not jacked to Jesus. A quick Google search has given me a list of temples without steeples created by the faithful sub. Excellent. Cardston, Alberta Temple. Lai, Hawaii Temple, Mesa, Arizona Temple. God, I feel like I'm in conference announcing temples. I have to say, I kind of feel giddy with power right now.
Yes.
I understand why he does it. Paris, France Temple, Meridian, Idaho
Got to
Temple.
sound like conference.
Tucson, Arizona Temple. Hong Kong, China Temple, Lima, Peru, Los Olivos Temple. So these are all temples, as the picture on the left shows, where there is no spire, there is a dome. So it'll be interesting to see how they reconcile some of the dome temple with this new emerging doctrine that you have to have this incredibly high steeple in order to even begin to practice your LDS faith and worship your God.
Well, I've got sad news for the members of these temple districts that have the temples without steeples, because I think it's clear to see what's going to happen here. They're going to suffer the same fate as Pluto, where Pluto was demoted from a planet that we all loved when we were kids to a planetoid. Not considered a real planet anymore. So I think these temples here, they're probably going to be demoted to templeoids, maybe templeoids, and they're not going to be allowed. Anyone who was married in any of these temples,
no,
like count. You're not going to get your own planet. You're going to get your own planetoid if you went through one of these temples. So sorry to tell you guys, without that steeple, sounds like it doesn't count anymore.
It doesn't count. And I love it because a lot of our viewers are old enough to remember Pluto. It was the planet. You memorized all of them. And then suddenly you're like, wait, what? It's not a planet. What will you take away from us next? So that's a great analogy, Landon. I love that. And I am sad about Pluto. So let's take a moment in mourning for Pluto. Okay. So Landon came up with this, which I thought was great. Do you want to describe this?
Yeah, this is we've all been to the amusement parks and the rides, and you go to get on it when you're a little kid and you have to stand up against the sign and it says you must be this tall to ride. Well, now we have a new standard, evidently, for temples. You must be at least this tall to be considered a temple. If you're too short, you're not considered a temple anymore. So again, those poor residents of those temples, sorry, you don't get to ride the celestial kingdom train because your temple is not tall. Shortchanged. That's right.
It. And we're kind of being funny about it. But again, in all seriousness, what they're trying to do is going to allow them to build as tall as they want because they will claim, and now they'll have proof to back it up if they start talking about it in church meetings, that this is a major part of our religion and it just doesn't work without it. So we're being funny, but it's very real.
And this is, to me, I don't know how to say it. It's a dick move. The Congress passes a bill to make sure that you can practice your religion without being persecuted, without people that might not agree with you, stopping you from building your church in a certain community. And I think every American would stand up and say, that is good. That is correct. That's what we should be doing. But what does the church do? They turn around, they take advantage of it. Well, now we can build as big as we want. We can go as high as we want. We can ignore every ordinance we want because the law is on our side. And we're going to just say, we received a revelation that you change your architecture, you get a revelation, you post it, and you say, this is now a tenet of our religion. We can do whatever we want. They could build a casino there that you could put your tithing into, and they could say, this is part of the tenet of our religion, and there's nothing the neighbors could do.
The slot machine. That's right. No, and if you think back to the letter, they have already crafted the narrative. This looking upward draws our eye to God. It draws God down to, they've already crafted the narrative of why it's so important. But the thing that really bothers me is they're going to try to tell us that it's always been that way. And it hasn't. That kind of gaslighting just drives me crazy. It hasn't always been that way, but they need it to be that way now as a workaround to get these things built. And People are going to be on board. I guarantee you right now that city council in Fairview has already received emails that say this kind of verbiage. I'm sure that they have.
And they're building these temples in neighborhoods because they stick out way above everything else. It shows their power. It shows their pride. And anyone who says that's not true, we're going to show you exactly where we're getting that information from.
That's right. Let's go to our next slide. Oh, here we go. The church recently purchased the Kirtland Temple, which is a beautiful, almost meeting house. The early temples that Joseph Smith was involved in, they were more like meeting houses. And I think this is a very pretty building, and it has just a very nice steeple on it. But again, under this new doctrine and direction, right, that we predict is coming, that's just not going to cut it, is it, Landon?
Yeah, evidently the Kirtland Temple didn't point to heaven, even though they want to claim that Moses and Jesus himself came to the temple, and Elijah and Elijah. More people, according to the prophet Joseph Smith, came to this. Well, not according to the prophet Joseph Smith, because he never said those angels came. But according to the Doctrine and Covenants written years after the incident, more personages came to this temple than any temple ever built. And yet it doesn't have a high steeple. Why is a steeple a requirement? But we now know why they bought the Kirtland Temple, and that's so that they can go back and retrofit it with much taller spires so that it can be a true temple of God.
That's right.
Because
that's
without
our prediction. That's our prediction. We don't know for sure, but I like how it has a double Moroni when we put this together. So I'm actually sure they won't change it, but by this new criteria, that you must have a steeple in either to fully embrace the worship of your religious tenets. You know, the Kirtland Temple, by that definition, doesn't cut it. So we'll see what happens. Anyway. All right. So we're going to talk about the Boston Temple. This is one of the first, I think it is actually the first example of height being an issue and having to fight for the right to have height, right? Is that it? I just made that up right now.
Yes, I know. We didn't rehearse that one.
I kind of like it.
And it went off better than our steeple one.
Well, I just think about our Heber residents who went around trying to get petitions signed, you know, and they went to one door at a faithful house and they knocked on it, and one person answered and they said, oh yeah, I'm not really going to sign, but thank you. And then someone else ran up behind that person and said, lighter and brighter and higher and lighter. And they kind of said, okay, thank you. But you know, that is the idea, isn't it? Lighter and brighter and taller. So this is one of the first examples when they actually had to take this to the court. So do you want to read this, Landon? I thought this was fascinating. And this is back in 2001, I believe, like 20 years ago.
Yeah, not long after construction of the Boston, Massachusetts temple began, a few neighbors became alarmed by its size and filed suit with the intention to have the temple torn down. The plaintiffs argued that the state's Dover Amendment, which exempts religious buildings from local zoning, violated the separation of church and state. The federal judge disagreed and ruled in favor of the church. Salt Lake Organizing Committee President Mitt Romney escorted U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy through the Boston, Massachusetts temple during the VIP open house. Just 6 years earlier, Romney had challenged Kennedy for his veteran seat in the Senate in a heated race many considered too close for comfort. The Boston, Massachusetts temple was dedicated without a steeple due to a lawsuit contesting the proposed height of the steeple. The church eventually won the case on appeal, and the 139-foot steeple was added about a year after the dedication. Elder Lawrence C. Dunn, the first president of the Boston, Massachusetts temple, passed away just hours after the court's ruling that the steeple could be added.
What a dramatic story. But what's key here is that the temple was dedicated for an entire year without a steeple. Does that mean that everything that happened in that temple without the steeple isn't valid? I mean, of course, we're being facetious, but it's sort of a circular argument there. What do you think about this story?
I think it's probably made up because that guy's name is Elder Dunn that died. So,
oh, and of course, Landon's referring to Paul H. Dunn. Good one, Landon. Yeah, it's probably fabricated. So, oh dear.
But this is showing you, and I don't remember. I just thought about this. I'm not sure when this happened, but isn't it ironic that the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000 was right around this very time. And we know that the church has multiple senators and multiple representatives within Congress. And I wonder what influence they had in due to this being an issue to get this passed through Congress. Something that sounds like a perfectly logical, rule. But can you just go and ignore every building code? I mean, can you say we don't want a fire alarm system in the building because we don't believe in that, and you don't have to put in a fire alarm system, or you don't have to put in fire sprinklers? If they're too expensive, you could just say, that's a tenet of our faith that we don't believe in fire sprinkler systems, and now we don't have.
If we burn, we burn. That's part of our religion. We're burning in the bosom. Yep, I can see it now. It's a great argument.
So yeah, I don't understand this, but again, we see the pull the church has, senators taking senators through. They're using their clout. And again, they all want separation of church and state until, they need the state to do something for them. Then they want the state to step in and do what they need so that they can be separate and do whatever they want.
Yep. Very interesting case study. Okay, so we started to think about height and building height and towers, and how in our experience in the church, which between the two of us is over 10 decades.
Is that a way to say 100 years?
Yeah, I'm trying to make it sound really like we really know what we're talking about.
And we still only add up to President Nelson's experience.
Yeah, we do not surpass that. Exactly. But there are certain ways that height and towers and things that are ostentatious are described in our scripture. So we just gathered a couple of the obvious ones that you guys have probably already thought of yourself. So of course we thought of Alma 31, where they talk about the Rameumptom. So, and I actually typed in Rameumptom into AI, and it made this. I was kind of impressed that it knew what it was talking about. So I'll read the first part, Alma 31, verse 13. For they had a place built up in the center of their synagogue, a place for standing, which was high above the head, and the top thereof would only admit one person. Therefore, whosoever desired to worship must go forth and stand upon the top thereof and stretch forth his hands toward heaven and cry with a loud voice. And again, this is something that the faithful came across and were horrified that this was happening. They were horrified at the words that were being said, but also just this ostentatious show of religious belief. Let's read the next one, Landon. You can read that.
Yeah, verse 21. Now the place was called by them Rameumptom, which being interpreted is the holy stand. Now when Alma saw this, his heart was grieved, for he saw that they were a wicked and a perverse people. Yea, he saw that their hearts were set upon gold and upon silver and upon all manner of fine goods. Yea, and he also saw that their hearts were lifted up unto great boasting in their pride. Yeah,
exactly. So it's funny because we've toured a couple temples lately, Red Cliffs and Orem. I think, gosh, maybe even tonight we'll try to go up to Layton. Who knows?
Yeah, I got stuck in the traffic jam for Layton.
Yeah, exactly. But if someone were to ask me to describe what the interior of a LDS temple was, well, first I'd say hotel lobby, but then I would say gold and silver and all manner of fine goods, right? And in this sense, it's used in a way, it's ostentatious, it's opulent. The true heart of religious worship perhaps is missing. And again, lifted up, when they're talking about this height, it's not in a positive way, is it?
Yeah, when your heart is lifted up, that's an indication that you are in apostasy, according to Alma, that it's pride. And that's what's happening when you're building tall towers that everyone can see you from. That is called pride. That's a Rameumptom. And as members of church, you should be horrified that you're building temples that look like this.
Yep. And they're not just high. Again, they are lit to be seen for miles. Yep. So, of course, the other example that we thought of right away was what, Landon?
So, the Tower of Babel. We all know this from our Old Testament days. This is not specifically Mormon, although the Mormons' Tower of Babel is in both the Old Testament and the Book of Mormon. Yep. If we remember the Jaredites, The Jaredites had to flee the Tower of Babel, and all nations, the language came from the Tower of Babel because the Lord scattered the people because they tried to build a building that was going towards the heavens, and they tried to build towards the heaven to get to heaven through a building. And the Lord struck it down, destroyed it, and scattered the people to all lands because of their wickedness in building a large, giant building pointing to heaven.
Yeah, that seems like a big coincidence.
But that's not all.
No, but wait, there's more.
We read in the Book of Mormon, we're all familiar with Lehi's dream and the great and spacious building. 1 Nephi 8:26, and I also cast my eyes round about and beheld on the other side of the river of water a great and spacious building, and it stood as it were in the air, high above the earth.
Yeah.
So again, a representation of pride, of evil, of wickedness is high buildings that are big and spacious, which is exactly what the temple is building. And these people are looking at those, at the neighbors are looking at the temples the same as the people in Lehi's dream are looking at the great and spacious building. They're going, this is a proud, prideful, glowing building that looks as if someone is trying to look like they're better than everybody else around them. And somehow that's supposed to make the community stronger. When they said in the letter, tell how this makes the community stronger, we've seen exactly the opposite in all the places that they're at Heber, in Cody, in Lone Mountain, now with the neighbors in McKinney. And I can guarantee it's going to happen over and over and over that the neighbors that are faced with these buildings are not going to be happy, and it's going to divide the neighborhoods. And so to say that it helps the community, that's just not true. And you as members of the church can say, we know that they will be blessed for this, but that's your opinion. Nobody who, you think somebody who can't go to a wedding has to sit outside the temple while their friend goes in, or their child goes into the temple and gets married, that they're blessed by sitting outside while their family goes inside? They're not blessings, but they may be in your life, but to the rest of the world, they're just big, spacious buildings.
That's right. And that's why I'm so curious, because it is pretty clear that high above, spacious, tall is never portrayed in a positive light. It's the opposite. So I am very curious to see if they do start introducing this into talks and devotionals, how exactly they will spin it, that you need something that everyone can see, that's light and bright. I guess maybe we saw a taste of it in that letter where it says it draws your eye to God. Maybe they'll use metaphors about the pillar in the wilderness. Maybe it'll be something like that. They'll have to get creative, I'm sure, but they must prove that it's part of the religion. They have to introduce that into the dogma, and then they can work their way around any obstacles legally.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing, and they'll get away with it because they have all the power and all the money, and you can buy anything in the world with money, and that's what they'll do.
Yeah. But at least we sort of called them out on it to begin with, preemptively.
Yeah, just like Jesus did to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Sometimes you have to go to the temple and say, what you're doing here is not right.
Are you comparing Mormonish Podcast and our coverage of the temples to overturning the money changers? Or I don't think so. No, not at all. But anyway, it is very interesting. All right, let's go on to our next. Now we're going to kind of just go through quick updates of all the temples that we cover. We are not kidding. Temples. When we began this about over a year ago, it was Cody. One of our Mormonish podcast viewers said, hey, something's going on in Cody. They might need some help or assistance. So we started there, and then somebody reached out from Heber, and then, contacted Lone Mountain, and there's several now that we're just talking to. And they're also talking among themselves, which is interesting because they're sharing information and just kind of talking about, what is happening, how do we deal with this, especially the fallout in the communities, because that's the most unfortunate part, that there is divisiveness, and everyone is so sad to see the community torn apart by trying to build these temples in places where they don't belong. And I think it makes all of us really sad, and these communities. So Heber Valley Temple update, Landon, what do we know is going on there? I think we have a next slide about that.
Yeah, they just delayed a decision on this. The church went before the court, and there is a lawsuit. The lawsuit,
There's one more lawsuit
for the dark skies had to be pulled because they didn't have
Yeah.
enough money to fight it. But one of the residents or resident groups still has a lawsuit out there. The church went before the lawyer or before the judge and asked them to overturn it and just throw the case out. Judge Jennifer Mabee of the 4th District Court listened to both attorneys, and she said, no, I want to look at this a little deeper. So she's postponed any decision until May and is going to dig in and look at it. And hopefully we see a judge that brings some common sense to this. There may be a law out there that says, but living in Utah, she should know better that buildings of this size are not required. She sees these other temples, and hopefully she comes back and makes the right decision, because this is a dangerous precedent to set, that churches can just come in and religious groups can come in and do whatever they wish with whatever property they buy, while their neighbors have to adhere to laws. I mean, can you imagine a sporting event where one team doesn't have to play by the same rules that all the other teams have to play by? That's just a disaster waiting to happen, and it's going to cause conflict, and it's going to cause divisiveness, and it's going to lead to hatred, because it's like, why do I have to follow the rules and they don't? And that's the problem with this law.
Yep. I like your idea that you were talking about earlier about building a religious edifice that was a stadium in the middle of a neighborhood.
Yeah, you could just say, hey, our church is going to build a football stadium in the middle of this residential neighborhood. Yeah, it's going to impact the traffic. Yeah, it's going to impact the neighborhood, the views, everything else. But hey, we're a church. We're going to build a football stadium. Then we're going to have a big religious revival in the middle of that football stadium 4 times a year. And the rest of the year, we're going to rent out concerts. We're going to rent out football. But hey, it's our religious right, because we're going to hold some religious services in there, so we can do whatever we want with that property. I mean, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And as soon as people start figuring out that they can, in order to level the playing field, become a religion and start building whatever you want, wherever you want. That's the answer.
Wow, you are just a rebel, Landon. That's all I can say. So, but yes, here in Heber, the judge was looking at it, and the church was hoping, of course, they'll just throw the lawsuit out. These are some residents that still have a lawsuit pending. And instead, the judge said, nope, I want to look at this. I want to look over the materials. And our resident friends told us it was May 23rd that there would be a decision. Then I wrote something strange on social media that said April 25th. I hope I don't know if that is correct, but if you're in Heber, you might want to look into that if something has been bumped or moved that you're not aware of. But I think it's going to be May 23rd. I'm hoping that's the date. So we'll see what happens there. So that's Heber. Cody, Wyoming. We talked to our friends there just a couple hours ago, and what did they tell us?
They have filed, all the briefs have been filed by both sides and turned into the judge as of April 15th. And so now the judge will review it and make a decision probably in the next couple months. Yep.
And again, both of these resident groups, these are self-funded. These are residents that have hired attorneys and have filed suits. The towns, not in Heber, but in Cody for a while, the town there was pushing back. And then they were remember the church lawyers came in and said, we're going to file a 4th lawsuit or something like that. And so, yeah, all that's left are these resident groups on their own trying to take action. So in Cody, we'll see. Everything's been filed, and we'll have an update next time on that. There is another temple out there that is just kind of in the beginning stages, and I haven't talked to anyone specifically. We do have a friend there on the ground who I think is in the hospital right now. I hope you feel better soon. But the residents are just starting to post on different forums about, hey, what is happening? Does anyone know about this? And this is the Bakersfield, California temple. there's going to be, again, 124-foot steeple. And as we looked into it, the city manager is LDS. We know how that has gone in other towns as far as being able to quickly pass things through. Do you want to read that little article there where they talk about it?
Yeah, this is from the local news there. LDS Church requests modification to allow for taller than allowed building height at Southwest Bakersfield site.
Yeah.
So again, go in where it doesn't belong. This is modus operandus at this point.
Yep, same thing. And the residents are just going, wait, what kind of tower? What? Because I think they all hear a church is coming in. And when you hear that, you just kind of imagine, oh, a church, it might have a nice little steeple. They have no idea about the lighting. And it's not a steeple, it's a tower. I mean, there's a huge distinction between just a steeple that's not attached and a tower that's part of the structure of the building. So, but anyway, that's the Bakersfield Temple. So we'll see. There may be an update on that. And then, of course, Lone Mountain, Nevada Temple. We did a whole podcast about that a couple of weeks ago. And there are a few updates on that. Landon, do you want to go to our next slide and we can talk about that?
Yeah, Lone Mountain LDS Temple discussion was pushed back. It was originally set for April. It's now been pushed back into mid-May. Because of the fact that the residents have become alarmed and have pushed back, and they were able to get a little bit of time to try to organize. Because when these come out, they only have literally like 2 or 3 weeks, while the church has been planning and working and changing zoning laws in the background and sending donations to candidates through their lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. And the residents find out, only the residents within 500 feet find out 3 weeks before it goes to the board.
Yeah, that's true. And in this case, the church requested the extension. So that says to me that these residents mobilized very quickly, and they did. They instantly said, I see a playbook here. And I know they had talked to others in other towns in Cody and Heber. And so the church requested this extension, I feel, because they weren't able to mobilize the members quickly enough to do what needed to be done. So that is an interesting scenario. So we'll be following that in a couple of weeks in mid-May when they have their city meeting.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of our friends in Lone Mountain who we're communicating with in that area, we kind of had a little discussion. A question that we get, of course, from post-Mormons is, temples seem to be empty. Why build more? That is a question. People who aren't LDS, they're just like, why do they need so many? They don't understand that a lot of these are running on limited sessions, limited people that are able to work there, limited people that are attending. So our friend in Lone Mountain, we were texting back and forth, and this friend said, there is confusion here in Nevada about why another temple is needed. It is an open secret that the current temple has problems, and that's the Las Vegas temple. It has problems staying sufficiently staffed. They can't find people to work there. They have cut back hours before due to staffing. The rumor, straight from friends who hold higher callings, is that temples will soon be designed to have multiple, wait for it, baptismal fonts, and focus will continue to be on getting the youth groups there every month. So temples will be less busy with endowments, but more busy with youth baptisms. As soon as she said that, Landon and I thought back to a time a couple months ago when we visited Temple Square, and a very nice senior guide was pointing to the renovation of the Salt Lake Temple. There's a huge hole there. It's just ginormous. And he's pointing to the temple, and then he points to the left of the temple. He goes, over there underground is where the baptismal fonts, plural, are going to be. Not connected to the temple, but separately. And he talked about the ease and the convenience and the need of, a whole lot of fonts, right? Should we say come now font? Yeah. So as soon as we put those two together, we were like, oh my gosh, is this the plan? What were your thoughts when you heard that first, Landon?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what he was talking about. I was asking, well, that's not even in the temple. It's underground over there, but they're going to connect it and say it's part of the temple because it's connected to the temple and it's underground. You won't really see it. I think there's going to be 2 entrances off to the side where the kids can come in and go straight down to the baptismal fonts.
Right. And I should say it's a baptistry. It's not just one font. For those of you that are never Mormons listening or watching, a baptismal font is inside the temple, and you perform baptisms for the dead in there. There are 12 oxen, symbolic of the 12 tribes. And then there's a tub, a very ornate tub set on the backs of the oxen. But the baptistry itself has changing rooms and rooms where you can say prayers. So it's a pretty big area built around this font. So it's not just 2 fonts, it's 2 entire baptistries. So what did you think, Landon, when you made this connection?
Oh, it became obvious what they're doing. They can't the adults aren't going to the temple. The temple attendance is down. So they're going to start sending youth groups to the temples. They're going to send them there more often. Because with twice as many baptismal fonts, you can have twice as many temple trips for the youth. The youth have to pull along all their parents with them, the different youth leaders, and then they're going to guilt their parents into, why can't you go to the temple? You need to have a recommend, and vice versa. The parents are going to say to the kids, you must always be worthy of a temple recommend. And let's face it, you can't do all these baptisms and endowments go down, because now all these people have been baptized. You now need more people doing endowments. And the church is then going to come back and say, oh, the kids are doing all the work and you parents aren't stepping up and doing the endowments. And they're going to use this to try to drive people to the temple. And of course, you can't go to the temple unless you pay your tithing. And so they're going to use it to drive revenue in the temple. This is the game plan. And I think it's pretty obvious as we start seeing that this is not occurring just in Salt Lake.
No. And I will say before we talk about this slide, that another thing, of course, is getting a child, and I'm talking about an 11-year-old that can go to the temple and perform these baptisms, getting a child on the covenant path. Now with more opportunities and pressure to do baptisms, you're in bishops' interviews more frequently. You have to make sure that you're worthy. You're being asked about your worthiness, and you always have to have that conditional use temple recommend that you get when you're younger to go. So it definitely puts you on that path and keeps you, within the parameters that the church wants you, in addition to all the other things that you said. So to me, it was, I have to say, brilliant. Honestly, it's really smart. It is. So we did start looking at other temples now, armed with our theory. Are any other temples putting in dual baptistries? And again, that's not just the font. That's a whole area where a youth group can come. Dressing rooms, prayer rooms, confirmation rooms is what I'm talking about. So what did we find, Landon? I was floored when we started looking, and I was like, we're right.
Well, I found out that the temple being built in my hometown is going to have 2 baptistries in it. The Syracuse Temple, the Linden Temple is going to have 2. The Smithfield Temple is going to have 2. I'm not sure if that one's open yet, or it's probably getting close. We found that there are some temples in Latin America that have 2. So Salt Lake is going to have 2, and we're hearing that Lone Mountain will probably have 2. So this is the direction that they're going with the temples, is to get kids there in order to indoctrinate them at a younger age and get them into the system.
That's right. And you're not wrong about the names. I mean, we talked about this on our episode that we did about same-sex sealing, the history of sealings, and when it became the focus on the nuclear family and sealing the nuclear family, there was just this need for names to take to the temple. For those of you that are never I use jargon, never Mormon. When people go to the temple after they've gone through the first time for themselves, they're given a name of someone who's deceased to do ordinances and perform ceremonies for. So you have to have a name of this person to go through for. And that's why Mormons do so much genealogy. They do indexing where they go through records and pull out the names. I think this is going to also cause a big push in, we've got to have more indexing. We've got to have these names for the temple. It's just going to keep everybody active with all of that busy work to supply the names for the multiple youth groups that are going to come with the 2 baptistries. And then, like you said, the names are baptized. The next step is they have to go through the other ceremonies and ordinances that happen in the temple. So it's just this never-ending cycle of pumping these names and people through the temple the worthiness that allows you to go to the temple. You can just see it really clearly if you think about it from point A to point B. Don't you think, Landon?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about controlling and having you dedicated to the institution.
Yeah.
And they're masters at it.
Yeah, they are. High demand, high control. Those are the words. And this is a perfect example.
Yep. And now, they're building these temples everywhere, and there's really only one more place that that they can go. And I think we all see this coming. That we're hearing through the grapevine that they may be putting temples into space so that they can be in orbit above us, and we can look up at the sky at any time and see a temple from anywhere on Earth.
See the temple. That's right.
And it'll make us all look up. So
that's right. Which is now a major tenet of our religion, to be looking up to God, right? And of course, you recognize this picture. Do you recognize this, Landon? This is Angel Moroni at the helm of the Starship Nauvoo. Excellent series, The Expanse. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. But they actually do have Mormons centuries from now who have massive amounts of wealth, and they've built this huge spaceship to go to another land with all of their members, and it has a giant Moroni right on top of it. And I'll leave you to watch it, but what happens to it is very satisfying as far as the Moroni on the top. So,
well, I will say there's one comforting. I mean, they have the money to do this.
Yes,
they have
they do.
More money than most countries.
Yeah.
But there is one saving grace to me as I look at this, and I realize that they can never build a temple in space based off of the last conference talks, because there's no way you can have a temple and 0 G's.
Oh, I get it. 0 G's, meaning garments.
Garments, yes.
Yeah. That's very funny. I love it. So, well, I think we've covered it. There was a lot here, and it's so interesting. And I have to say again, one temple that's being built, it's interesting what's happening. For a while there, we were calling it a tale of 2 temples. Remember that? We were comparing Heber and Cody. Now we've got 5 temples that we're looking at, and it is just so obvious what is happening. And again, I put a call out to any bigger media. Somebody look at this story. It's just fascinating what is happening in these towns. And people reach out to us and tell us about temples that were built in the past. Before there was the internet, or before there was all this connection and communication. And it seems like this kind of thing has been going on forever, but nobody's been able to really pinpoint it or get the word out. It seems like it's always been happening.
And when I was growing up, there was like 15 temples. So
exactly.
They were only built once every couple decades. So it wasn't a systemic problem. But at this point, it's just become a systemic problem where the church moves in on a community. They choose what that community is going to look like by building what we call, a skyline changer. That's what these temples are. They change the skyline of the community, and yet the community seems to have no say in it. That is not democracy either, when the community gets no say in what goes in, because you have enough power to pass laws that say we can do whatever we want through Congress, and the communities are helpless to fight against it, other than to point out that these are not tenets of your faith, in which case the church just changes the rules again by claiming that it is.
Yep, by adding the steeple. And it's interesting, we discuss, I bet this is happening in other countries, but there's really no way to know. And then interestingly, we were contacted by someone who is familiar with the temple in Peru. And he said, I saw your podcast and some of your podcasts on the playbook of the temple. He goes, I didn't recognize it, but now I do. The same thing has happened here. And we're actually going to have him on to do a podcast in a little while, just to talk about, among other things, the Peruvian temple and what happened there, because he saw it very clearly. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, huh? Because it's pretty obvious. It is the same playbook with some variations. So that's exactly right. Well, I think we covered it. I hope you guys learned something, and we'll just continue to keep you updated, because it seems like things are happening almost every week with these now 5 temples that we're keeping an eye on. So please comment and let us know what you think. Do you live in any of these areas? Are you familiar with any of these methods that the church is using to build these temples in areas that they are not zoned for, and that they break all the codes and all the restrictions and have to get them changed? Let us know what you're thinking. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when our new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. You can also help financially support Mormonish Podcast. We have links in our show notes to Venmo and PayPal and mormonishpodcast.org. And we sure appreciate everybody that does help. We really couldn't put these podcasts out without all of you. We also have a new link in our show notes to Mormonish merch if you want a mug or a hat or some kind of Mormonish. Don't you have your mug, Landon? What happened?
I've got it. Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah, that's the cue. When I say mug, you have to, yeah, see, coordinated effort. Anyway, it's kind of fun. And we do have a link to that in the show notes. And thank you so much, everybody. We will see you next time from Mormonish Podcast. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.